Have you ever considered a question? How did ancient humans find irons? In 1925, an archaeologist named Howard Carter is standing inside a tomb that's been sealed for over 3,000 years. He's unwrapping the mummy of a boy king, Tutankhamun himself. Layer after layer of ancient linen. And then, strapped right to the pharaoh's thigh, he finds something that shouldn't exist. A dagger. A gleaming, razor-sharp iron blade. And here's the part that makes your skin prickle. It hadn't rusted. Not after 33 centuries, and it was made of iron, a metal that, according to everything we know about human history, ancient Egyptians had absolutely no idea how to mine or melt. So how did a boy king get a weapon made of a metal his entire civilization couldn't produce? Stay with me, because the answer is genuinely out of this world. Literally. Let me ask you something first. How did ancient people get iron tools thousands of years before they knew how to actually dig up and melt iron ore? It sounds impossible. It sounds like a glitch in the timeline. But it happened again and again all over the world. And the story of how humanity cracked it is one of the most beautiful accidents in the whole of history. So let's go back to that dagger. Because in 2016, scientists finally got to study it properly. They aimed an X-ray fluorescence scanner at the blade, a tool that can read the exact chemical makeup of a metal without damaging it. And what they found stopped them cold. The blade contained about 11% nickel, traces of cobalt. Now, that combination isn't something you find in ore dug out of the ground. That is the unmistakable fingerprint of an iron meteorite. Let that sink in. King Tut's dagger was forged from a rock that fell from space, and suddenly the whole mystery unravels. The very first iron tools didn't come from the earth at all. They fell from the sky. Ancient humans were cosmic scavengers. They'd find these strange, heavy black stones scattered across the desert, and they realized this material was harder and stranger than anything else they had. They couldn't melt it. They had no idea how. So they just hammered the cold metal into shape, slowly, patiently, treating each meteorite like a piece of the heavens. And they knew exactly where it came from. The Egyptians had a word for iron. They wrote it as ba-en-pet. You know what that translates to? Metal from heaven. The Sumerians called it an-bar, sky fire. They weren't being poetic by accident. They genuinely believed this stuff was a gift from the gods. And honestly, can you blame them? And this wasn't just a Middle Eastern thing. Travel all the way north to Greenland, and for centuries the Inuit people built an entire hunting culture around one gigantic meteorite, the Cape York meteorite. They'd chip cold flakes off this star metal and hammer them into harpoon heads. Their survival, their weapons, their whole way of life ran on metal from outer space. So picture the world back then. Before anyone knew how to smelt iron, this was the ultimate status symbol. Rarer than gold, more precious than jewels. If you owned an iron blade, you owned a piece of the sky itself. That's why they buried it with a king. But here's the obvious question, right? If iron ore is sitting in the ground all over the planet, and it is, why on earth were people scavenging space rocks? Why not just dig it up? And the answer comes down to one brutal, unforgiving problem: heat. Here's the thing. If you throw copper or tin into a roaring campfire or an early pottery kiln, something wonderful happens. At around 1,000 degrees Celsius, it melts. It turns into a glowing puddle you can pour and shape and work with. That's the whole reason the Bronze Age came first. Copper and tin are cooperative. They give in to fire pretty easily. But iron ore? Iron ore is stubborn. Ridiculously stubborn. To actually melt it, you need to hit 1,538 degrees Celsius. That is a staggering amount of heat. Trying to smelt iron in a Bronze Age furnace was like trying to bake a pizza with a hairdryer. You could blast those rocks all day long. They'd get hot, they'd glow, and they'd just sit there, doing absolutely nothing, mocking you. So for the longest time, humanity was stuck. We could see iron. We had it in our hands, in the form of these precious fallen stones. But the enormous supply locked inside ordinary dirt might as well have been on the moon. We simply didn't have the thermal horsepower to reach it. And this is where the story could have just stopped. But it didn't. Because somewhere around 1500 to 1200 BCE, in the rugged mountains of what's now Turkey, a group of smiths in the Hittite Empire did something genius. And here's the twist that makes this the best part of the whole story. They didn't figure out how to melt iron. They found a way to cheat. They invented something called the Bloomery process, and it's pure chemical magic. Here's how it worked. They'd build a tall clay chimney, like a little furnace tower. Inside it, they'd stack layers of iron ore and charcoal over and over. Then they'd pump air into the bottom using leather bellows. Squeezing, feeding the fire more and more oxygen, keeping it screaming hot. And inside that furnace, something invisible and incredible happened. All that burning charcoal produced a thick cloud of carbon monoxide gas. And this gas, this is the beautiful part, this gas acted like a thief. It crept into the solid iron ore and stole the oxygen atoms right out of it. Because iron ore, you see, is really just iron chemically bonded to oxygen. Rip the oxygen away, and what's left behind is pure iron. And the smiths pulled this off without ever melting a thing, so what did they get? At the bottom of the furnace, they'd find this glowing, spongy lump, a weird mass of metal tangled up with glassy waste. They called it a bloom, and honestly, it looked like a white-hot metallic cauliflower, lumpy, porous, ugly, and absolutely full of promise. But it wasn't finished. This is where the sweat comes in. The smiths would drag that glowing sponge out of the fire, lay it on an anvil, and hammer it. Hard. Again and again. Every single strike squeezed out the liquid rock waste, the slag, like wringing water from a sponge. Blow after blow, hour after hour, they pounded that ugly lump into a solid, dense, usable piece of earthly iron. It was brutal, exhausting work, but it worked. For the first time, humanity could make iron from dirt. And now we get to why this changed absolutely everything. Because there's one enormous difference between bronze and iron, and it has nothing to do with strength. It's about supply. Think about bronze for a second. To make it, you needed copper and tin mixed together. Copper wasn't too bad, but tin? Tin was the microchip of the ancient world, exceedingly rare. You could only find it in a few precious places, Cornwall in Britain, or faraway Afghanistan, which meant civilizations had to build these massive, fragile, sprawling trade routes stretching across the entire known world just to keep the metal flowing. And those networks were delicate. Too delicate. Around 1200 BCE, the great Bronze Age civilizations mysteriously collapsed. Kingdoms fell. And when they fell, the trade routes shattered. Suddenly, the tin stopped coming. The whole world was plunged into a metal crisis. No tin, no bronze. No bronze, no weapons, no tools. Disaster. But iron? Oh, iron was a completely different animal. Iron is the fourth most abundant element in the entire Earth's crust. It is quite literally everywhere. Under your feet, right now, there's iron. And once the secret of the Bloomery got out, once ordinary people learned the trick, a village didn't need a global trade empire to arm itself anymore. They didn't need to beg for rare tin from across the sea. They just needed three things: dirt, wood, and a bellows. That's it. And this is the part that gives me goosebumps. This triggered the greatest democratization of power in human history. Suddenly, strong metal wasn't just for kings and elite chariot warriors. It was for everyone. Cheap, tough iron axes let ordinary people chop into dense European forests that had blocked them for thousands of years, clearing land, building new lives. Iron-tipped plows ripped into hard clay soil that wooden tools could never crack, and farms exploded with new harvests. Food multiplied, populations swelled. And on the battlefield, everything flipped. The old world of a handful of rich warriors in gleaming bronze gave way to massive armies of ordinary people, every single foot soldier carrying a locally forged iron sword. This is the raw material that built the great empires. Rome, Han China, the sprawling powers that would shape the entire ancient world. So let's come all the way back to where we started. A dagger, buried with a boy king, forged from a stone that fell out of the night sky. That blade was the very beginning of this story. Iron so rare and magical it was worth more than gold, treated as a literal gift from the heavens. And yet, just a few centuries later, that same metal became the most ordinary thing in the world. The stuff of farmers and blacksmiths and common soldiers. Metal from heaven became metal from the mud beneath our feet. And isn't that the most human story of all? We started by looking up at the sky, scavenging the scraps the universe happened to drop in our laps. And then, through patience, sweat, and one brilliant chemical trick, we learned to pull that same power straight out of the ground ourselves. We stopped waiting for gifts from the gods, and we started forging our own future, one hammer blow at a time.